This segment of the Chopin podcast is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States, presenters of the National Chopin Competition in Miami, Florida, January 2025. When I was a senior in college, I had the great privilege of meeting and playing for pianist John OConor. One of the pieces I played for him was a Nocturne, not by Chopin, but by early 19th century Irish composer John Field. It was number 4 in A major, which you're hearing now. This performance is by John OConor himself, who recorded all of his countrymen's nocturnes for the Telarc label. Without this music, Chopin would have probably never even had the idea to compose a nocturne. And here with me is none other than John OConor to discuss the life and music of John Field and consider the impact it had on Chopin.
I played my first John Field Nocturne when I was about 7 or 8. I mean, it's really a wonderful way to introduce young pianists to know how to actually produce a beautiful sound in a melody and still keep the accompaniment gentle and in the background. And in Russia, they still use John Field a lot for teaching young children how to do cantabile and that sort of thing. He was born in Dublin in 1782, and his father sort of realized he had a great talent for piano. And of course, Mozart was 16 at that stage and had already conquered all around Europe, including London. So word of Mozart would have come back to Dublin. So his father decided that he would turn John Field into another Mozart because he was a prodigy. He did very well as a young child. And so his father decided to apprentice him to Clementi in London, which was daring. His father being a violinist and not much money, but he spent £100, which was a fortune in those days, and to apprentice John Field to Clementi in London. Clementi not only being the famous pianist and composer, but also built pianos. And so John was his apprentice, and Clementi discovered that when John Field demonstrated his pianos to clients, they bought more pianos and he sold more pianos. So he went on a tour around Europe in the early 1800s and brought John Field along, and they went to Vienna and Paris and ended up in St. Petersburg when winter was setting in. And in those days, when winter set in St. Petersburg, you didn't leave until spring. During the winter, John Field became the darling of all the daughters of the aristocracy who wanted piano lessons with this dashing young Irish pianist. So when spring came, the always very peculiar, miserably spending money, Clementi decided, well, we're leaving now. And John Field said, well, I'm not. And he spent most of the rest of his life in Russia. Nobody had ever written a nocturne for the piano before John Field. In those days, well, after dinner, they wanted some nice piano music in these aristocratic houses, but they didn't necessarily want the sonatas and fantasies and variations, which were in the 1700s. So John Field started experimenting with shorter piano pieces, and he published Pastoral and Romance and things like that. And then in 1814, published his first 3 nocturnes. Now, Chopin was only 4 at the time, and they became the rage of Europe, which was extraordinary before the TikTok and Instagram and all the rest of it, that things go around the world so fast these days. But in those days, word got out very quickly. So he published more nocturnes, and one of his students was a Polish girl who went from St. Petersburg back to Poland and played John Field nocturnes, and Chopin heard them, and he started writing nocturnes, and the rest is history. When I was in my 20s, I had read a British lexicon which said that John Field was a pale imitation of Chopin. And typical British, trying to put down the Irish, and really got the Irish up in me. And I thought, this idiot who was writing this doesn't even know that John Field was way before Chopin. And I said, people should know more about John Field so that they realize it. And the nocturnes are his best work and so special. And it inspired me to actually want to record them.
Do you have a favorite Field nocturne? I mean, a lot of our listeners might not be familiar, so I'd love for you to share with them, maybe a place to start, a nocturne that's particularly special and dear to your heart.
Oh, I think the F major, number 6 of Nocturne. I just adore that piece, and I can never get tired of playing it every single time I play it. I just adore it.
and that one has just becomes very embellished. I mean, you really see a lot of influence on Chopin, I think, in this piece.
Yeah,
So just,
his imagination was taking flight.
this music was sitting on the desks of so many pianists in Paris. Not only Chopin, but Liszt, all of his contemporaries. Liszt has an edition, I think, of
Yeah, I mean the Schirmer actually. The Schirmer edition is the Liszt edition. Remember, Field was renowned piano teacher as well. In fact, Anton Rubinstein in the late 1800s used to credit him as starting the Russian piano school, which has now become so famous. And Anton Rubinstein used to talk about John Field and how he just sat almost motionless at the piano and hardly moved his body at all. And when he practiced, he would be fastidious. I mean, he would have a bowl of, let's say, marbles or something like that on one side of the piano, and he'd practice one passage, small passage, very brief. And when he got it right, he would move the marble from one side of the piano to the other. And he would stay at the same passage until such time as he emptied the bowl of marbles on one side. But certainly there were field nocturnes all around Europe at that stage. And I remember when I studied in Vienna, I used to go into Doblinger's music shop and go through the antiquariat part of it. And I would find extraordinary editions of single copies of Field.
Maybe we could listen to a little bit of the first nocturne that you recorded for Telarc, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. It's hard to listen or even look at the score, especially without having Chopin colored glasses on. Surely this one, on some level, whether it's direct or indirect, was a model for his own Opus 9 number 2.
I think so. I mean, Chopin's harmonies were more complex, and he did develop things a little bit more than John Field did, who allowed the simplicity to speak for itself. But at the same time, there's another E-flat nocturne. I mean, in the Schirmer edition, it's number 8, and I think the Peters edition in number 9. And in the middle of that nocturne, there's actually one phrase which is almost exactly the same as the Chopin Opus 9 number 2.
Here's Field. And here's Chopin.
And the left hand is almost like the Opus 9 number 2, because now John Field doesn't do the simple single notes, but he does the chords. It's just like one section of them. It's almost as though Chopin lifted that out of John Field, changed the harmony slightly, and put it into his Opus 9 number 2.
It's easy to say that something like this E-flat nocturne is just some kind of proto version of Chopin's own early E-flat nocturne. There are many similarities, but one could flip that around and say, I mean, it was John Field who was the first who even thought of such a thing. And
absolutely. Of course, Chopin developed the nocturne, and lots of other people did after that. And I've done television programs in Ireland on the development of the nocturne and played lots of things, including Barber and the Scriabin left-hand nocturne, the Grieg nocturne I've always enjoyed. But I mean, this was the first. It was simple. Yes, it was. But to say that Bellini arias are a pale imitation of opera compared to, let's say, the complexities of Puccini is to downgrade what Bellini actually achieved, because he has beautiful melodies and simple accompaniments in his arias, and they're special for that reason. I think the John Field nocturnes are special for the reason that he put this beautiful melody, very simple accompaniment, and let the music speak for itself.
I sense some pride in having John Field as a compatriot, and I wish I was from the same country as the guy who invented the nocturnes. But I wonder if you could speak to is there anything about John Field's music or the nocturnes in particular that is particularly Irish, or is it something about his personality? Maybe. I mean, can you identify any kind of national characteristics, or is it not something that's so obvious?
I don't think it's all that obvious. I mean, there actually was a nun in Ireland who wrote a whole treatise which said that he took all his melodies from Irish folk tunes. I can't really find that. And I think that was, I mean, I've gone through it and I've gone through the book and I've looked at various things and I don't really think that that's the situation. I mean, remember that John Field left Ireland when he was about 8 and never returned. So, I mean, he wouldn't have been all that au fait with Irish traditional music. So I think that really it was his own inspiration. I think it really was quite extraordinary what he produced.
We also know that Chopin would decorate field nocturnes. He loved to play them for students and use them as examples of how to ornament. Can you talk about that? It's sort of a lost art. Do you think maybe on some level Chopin was treating them as teaching material as well as beautiful pieces on their own?
Absolutely. But then Chopin used to decorate his own nocturnes. I mean, he would have something published and then a student would come and play them and he would play it completely differently. If you look at some of his students' copies that we have extant, he will write in extra notes in the nocturnes that they should play and just decorate it nonstop. And I think we've lost that sort of idea of improvisation, which, I mean, Beethoven, Mozart, all of these people was part of their upbringing, but we don't do it anymore. And I think that's a pity.
Well, speaking of Beethoven, isn't it a little bit Beethoven's fault? I don't mean that literally, but you don't change a Beethoven score, John.
No.
You know that. You've taught me that. So this idea of urtext, I think, maybe is more meaningful in the case of Beethoven sonatas than it is a Chopin nocturne, say.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trouble. There can never be. I mean, Chopin, when he changed things for his students, it was totally different. So, I mean, which did he want? Did he want what was originally published or what he changed for his students? And therefore, what is an urtext and what can you do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about what is the difference between a Beethoven sonata and a Chopin nocturne, such that like one you're allowed to embellish the score and one you're not. I mean, what's the difference between this music, John? I mean, we play it in the same concerts, we record it, we listen to it with pleasure. So how do you interpret those two different, I guess, aesthetics?
Well, I'm not going to try and improve Beethoven. I just love him too much, and I've recorded just about everything he wrote. So, and I think Beethoven is sacrosanct. And I'm not going to change Chopin either. But I'd have rows with people about which edition you use of Chopin. I was brought up with the Paderewski edition. I see nothing wrong with it.
But if you're judging a competition and somebody comes out with a Chopin nocturne and they add their own decoration, are they immediately disqualified?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, people keep on saying, I mean, I'm the jury of so many competitions. And they say, what do you look for? And I said, I look for a personality. I look for somebody who's going to actually play the music as though they are living it and not like a typewriter. I mean, there are too many people who just play notes fast and loud and that's it. That's not enough. That's never enough. If they want to change it, they do something that I like, good for them.